Hello and welcome. My name is Dan Curtin. I'm with JP Morgan Chase, and I'm responsible for the private bank here in New England. And I'm also on the market leadership team for JP Morgan Chase for all of New England. JP Morgan, when we enter a market like this, we come with all parts of the bank. We bring employees, jobs, we bring investment and a focus on growing the economy. We bring our philanthropy dollars, and we bring our community engagement. One topic that touches on all of those is the importance of housing and affordable housing. The reason for that is because having affordable and available housing is a key pathway to prosperity for many of our families and is a key element to economic stability of the region. So without further delay, I would like to turn it over to Catherine Carlock to lead our panel through a discussion around one of the key elements to solving this housing crisis, the conversion of office to residential.
Thank you so much, Dan, and welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to the Globe Summit. As Dan said, my name is Catherine Carlock. I'm the real estate editor real estate reporter, not editor, for the Boston Globe. I'm very excited about this panel here today. As Dan said, we'll be talking about office to residential conversion. So we're gonna start with just a couple statistics. Across the country, there's about 902 million square feet of vacant office space. That's about 530 Hancock Towers, give or take. In downtown Boston, office vacancy is at its highest point in decades, 20.4%. Not quite as high in Cambridge and the suburbs, but still at record highs. So since COVID and the rise of hybrid work, things just look and feel different in downtown. But with that change comes opportunity. And so we have gathered a really exciting panel here today to talk us through what it looks like to take empty office space and make it into housing. So we'll let the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
Thank you. Hi, I'm John Weil, Senior Program Manager for Downtown Conversions at the Planning Department.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mark Walsh-Cooke. I'm a principal with Arup. We're an international engineering consulting firm, and I lead our commercial property business.
Good afternoon. I'm Maren Reepmeyer, and I'm an architect and founder of a company called More Design and Consulting.
Great. So, John, you meant your title is officially a conversion title with the planning department. So that to me indicates this is something that the city is really focused on.
Yes, I think this is something the city takes very seriously, and we realize there's a unique opportunity right now in Boston to basically take what are dark buildings, older underutilized office buildings, and give them new life as residential rental.
Yeah.
And it really is something that we're putting our best foot forward and really trying to help make happen here to make a positive change and bring vibrancy back to Boston.
Yeah. A lot of times when you hear we're gonna well, there's so much empty office space. 530 Hancock Towers empty across the U.S. Why can't we just make it housing? Turns out it's a little complicated. So, Maren, Mark, what goes into the actual physical conversion? It's not as simple as saying, okay, let's put a bed and a bookshelf in and go. What are some of those things that have to happen physically to convert an office to an apartment?
Sure. So first you have to look at the building's attributes. So there's all things that come to play, but the building's attributes is really where we start to find challenges and where we try to find that compatibility with conversion. So it has a lot to do with floor plate size, window to wall ratio. So
right, I'm going to stop you. When you say floor plate, what's a floor plate? Just how big a floor is?
Correct, how big your floor is. So to the perimeter of the exterior wall,
okay,
basically. And all these office buildings have cores that are vertical transportation. That's elevators, stairs, that kind of thing. And then from your core to your window is really what you're looking for, those sweet spot dimensions that work well for residential uses. So bedrooms, for instance, need to have glazing, windows, natural light, light, ventilation. So that's where you get into trouble with those bigger floor plates, because it's a longer depth from your core to your window wall.
So it's okay for an office to say, okay, well, we're going to have a row of cubicles here and we don't have a window. That doesn't work for an apartment. So, and that means that structurally some things might have to change, right, Mark?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that window to wall ratio, if you're trying to, the floor plate, if you're trying to bring the facade in, are you cutting into the structure? So our structural engineers get involved. The services are very different. Every apartment wants a bathroom, every apartment wants a kitchen. Offices don't have that. So it's that whole...
One bathroom per floor versus an individual bathroom for each apartment.
So there's a whole new sort of set of services. Are we upgrading to all electric to meet the the Budo regulations? So there's a lot of issues. And as Maren said, the facade. You're potentially changing the facade to add operable windows. Everybody wants light, and this time of year you'd like to open your window to the outside.
Yeah. Well, we'll touch on all electric in a minute because the sustainability element of this is really fascinating. But John, I know a lot of times what I'm hearing from the development community is that it's not an inexpensive prospect to make a conversion like this. The city said, okay, we're going to recognize this expense, maybe throw in a little bit of a tax break. Can you talk us through what the city's program is, some of the tax benefits involved there, and then the kind of interest level in Boston so far?
No, absolutely. So the city's program is at its heart a tax abatement, as you said. It's a 75% tax abatement for 29 years. And it's something where the city is really trying to put its best foot forward, and this is sort of a historic offer from the city of Boston to the development community.
Historic how?
Because I don't think that different cities are unique in what they have at tools at their disposal. If you look at Chicago with their program, they're utilizing a TIF. New York City's using other tools.
TIF,
Boston,
tax increment financing. There's a lot of alphabet soup when it comes to real estate. But yeah, different tax. No, don't apologize. Yeah. Different tax structures.
But Boston, for us, our tax abatement really is the best tool that we have on hand and one that we can readily use versus other communities. So we're excited to offer this. I think, in the spirit of this, though, if we're going to help subsidize housing creation in Boston, we do want to stay true to our principles. So that we're asking two main things in return. One is that you produce 20% income restricted units on site. The other is that you meet the new stretch code for green energy, just simply because both affordability as well as sustainability are two things that are very important.
Sure.
Now, in terms of interest, we've seen great interest from the development community to date. I think we've been in contact with most of the major players you'd expect us to be talking to, as well as a lot of current building owners who are looking to figure out what they can do with this underutilized office property that they may have had for a number of years. When it comes to penciling out, we'll be the first to admit that these deals have very thin margins and are difficult to get to pencil. But back to the previous point that was made around attributes that you're looking at, we really view this sort of as a collection of unicorns, not yet a product type. And in that, when you're looking for a successful deal, what you're looking for is something where the elevators are in good condition and they work. You have two staircases already in the building. Ideally, you have operating windows. It becomes much more of a code compliance question than necessarily an architecture question, because a lot of these conversions are largely interior renovations.
In Boston.
In Boston.
Not the case in other cities, like Chicago, like New York.
Yeah.
What do you see conversions looking like here versus maybe what we see in other cities?
Sure. So I think, there's a lot of pluses for Boston. I think it's interesting when you are comparing Boston to the other cities. Different cities are moving at different rates when it comes to the conversions and how many are happening. For instance, right now, I think there's 69 projects in Manhattan. I think here we have 13.
So we have 11 applications to convert 15 buildings, 500,000 square foot of office being taken offline.
How many apartments is that by?
That is 507 units of housing being created, which means that rough numbers, we're bringing 1,000 new people to live downtown. So when you talk about bringing vibrancy back to downtown, whether it's foot traffic, retail, restaurants, you name it, 1,000 people in the first year of the program, we're very pleased.
Yeah.
But Maren, so 69 in Manhattan, though, just in terms of scale.
Scale.
But granted, Manhattan in terms of scale is quite a bit larger than Boston, but
Right, so generally speaking, Boston is somewhere around 10% the size of New York-ish, you know? And the size of the buildings differs, you know, the size of the projects differ. What I love in Boston, what we're seeing and what I think we'll see more of is this Class B, Class C kind of smaller scale. I think if you look at our central business district, we have something like 250 buildings that are, you know, pre-1970. So maybe right-sized in terms of floor plates, and could be great candidates for conversion.
Sure.
So it's exciting. And then you think about the historic fabric and the beautiful architecture, and people want to be in those spaces. People love to live and dwell in those beautiful spaces. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah. Mark, I know Arup has done a lot of work in New York on this. So how do you see Boston's, I mean, Maren mentioned Class B, Class C. That, you know, just in real estate parlance, Class A tends to be top tier buildings, best towers that you want to be in, a little bit lesser quality as you go down grade-wise. So, Mark, in Manhattan, how are you seeing it differently compared to what we're seeing here?
I think it's, you know, as kind of Maren mentioned, you know, that it's the sort of the scale of the building. You know, I think, you know, the buildings we're looking at in New York are in of themselves 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 square feet. You know, it's still a sort of a Class A minus, Class B, you know, product. So I think it's kind of a similar sort of quality, shall I say, of building. But, you know, it's just in of themselves, they're a bigger scale. You know, the floor plates are definitely very deep, you know, so there's that challenge. So, you know, in a lot of cases, we're looking at sort of notching into the building. Are we putting, you know, additional structure on top, you know, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a different typology of building we're looking at down there.
I mean, the yield too is different. I think most of the projects here are somewhere, you know, mostly under 100 units or about 100 units, somewhere there. You know, I just was reading about the Pfizer building in New York. That's 1,400 units.
Right.
You know, so the scale is different.
No, I mean, I think that's a fair point. To date, because the pre-war buildings are slightly smaller in scale, we're seeing sort of the 50 to 100 unit buildings. I think that we do have hopes that there's some really good 1970s and 1980s office towers that we think are ripe for conversion.
Developers, I think he's talking to you.
And as well as I'm looking for my first lab to residential conversion to take place in Boston, because we have a number of completed projects that are sitting dark, that have not yet been inhabited, that would make lovely residential. But I think, you know, that's part of the reason the program originally was going to sunset in June of this year, and Mayor Wu decided to extend for an additional 18 months. And part of this was we got direct feedback from developers that they needed that larger window in order to actually land one of these bigger deals and bring it in and make it a successful conversion.
Well, I mean, it's a tough economic climate, you know, for any project right now. So, you know, I can understand why there's perhaps not as much happening as you'd like, but, you know, hopefully next year, you know, we'll start to see some of those buildings come.
We did just see a big move from the Fed, so maybe that'll shake things up. Who knows? But John, I'm curious, of the buildings that y'all have mentioned that have been proposed for conversion, where in the city are they? What type of buildings are they? Like, talk us through who is proposing these? What type of buildings are being proposed for conversion?
So like I said, it's really still a collection of unicorns. We're seeing two major groups participating in our program. One is current building owners, especially in downtown, that have a building that maybe has been in the family for a decent period of time, or that they originally had purchased to operate as an office building. The other are folks coming in purposely to acquire buildings to convert to residential.
Wait, so people coming in and saying, this is an empty building, I'm going to buy it and convert it to take advantage of the city tax program.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're seeing strong interest from this camp. I think in terms of buildings to date, we're seeing primarily, like I said, pre-war buildings. I think that they've all been, you know, types of buildings. They're at the end of the block, not mid-block, so they've got good windows, they've got good, you know, staircases and elevators. Right. I think that really it's one of these situations whereby it's hard to generalize. We're seeing everything from 6 stories and 15 units, which actually coincidentally will be delivering its first apartments summer of this coming year.
Awesome.
So very exciting. But all the way up to, you know, a combination of 3 buildings together that have 100 units in it. And so I think that, like I said, we're seeing very strong interest, and we're looking forward to seeing this interest grow as the program continues.
Yeah, so you're seeing, Maren, you mentioned the Pfizer building, you know, in Manhattan, but Boston, just in terms of the downtown core and so much of the historic fabric in the city. I mean, this building, if you're virtual, you're not here, but we're in the historic Harvard Club. So much of Boston's commercial fabric really has such a rich history. So how does that factor in when we're thinking of conversions? Either, I mean, I think of, a character of a historic building versus, is it harder if it's got older elevators, if the stairs are, if the stairs are creaky, if the windows have asbestos or something? How does that work?
Yeah, so I think it's a couple of factors. I think one, as mentioned before, the codes. So things need to be made up to code. You need to make sure that it's safe for humans to live there, right? So that's one thing, and of course there's costs associated with that. But I think, I'm really interested too in that character and people wanting pride of place and wanting to have a home that they just cherish and love. And a lot of that I think you find in Bostonians is, I love my city, I love the fabric, the historic fabric, and that it's weaved in and out in some of these larger buildings and whatnot. People want to be in those spaces, so I think there's demand for that. But back to the, the vibrancy and the urban core, I think, when it comes to the financial district, if we want to see more of those conversions at larger scale in Boston, certainly it can be done. I think part of the draw there is the location, access to transportation, nightlife. It has all the things that make a good recipe for residential.
And one of the developers I was speaking to, I mean, that was their goal. They could see sort of moving ahead with the project if it gave them a place they wanted to be, right? It was a location that suited that type of product. I mean, most of the developments we're seeing now, even if there's a lab component, there's usually a housing component. People want that, that neighborhood. I mean, look at sort of, Cambridge Crossing, that kind of thing. It's not just all office. It's not just all a lab. I think, you're trying to create that vibrancy. So, if there's a building, in a location that suits that, I think, developers are interested in that.
Yeah. So we've got potential historic conversion all the way up to potential lab to residential, which, I spent a lot of time writing about office to lab conversion. I never thought I would hear about lab to residential. But I mean, is that something that, John, that you see as a possibility for the city?
Absolutely. I think in two ways. One is, as you referenced, there were the office to lab conversions. And some of those projects have not been as successful as you would have wanted. And therefore, there is the opportunity to pivot and to turn that into an office to residential.
Yeah.
So makes a lot of sense there. But then I also think that smaller scale ground up lab that has been built also can avail itself well to residential. And I think this goes back to your question around sort of location, where we've seen a lot of interest in the downtown and the financial district, but we've also seen pockets of interest in adjoining neighborhoods. So whether it's the edge of the South End, whether it's the West End, Bullfinch Triangle, we're starting to see it Fort Point. And so it's definitely branching out. And I mean, I think from my perspective with our program, we'll welcome all comers so that don't let the specific geography constrain you. Please give me a call and let me know if you've got a building and you think that it would make a lovely conversion. But sales pitch aside, I think that it really is, there is, as you reference, a huge component of this program, which is preservation.
Yeah.
And so it's great because I think one thing which we have seen, which is sort of ironic, is you look at the latter district, whether it's Temple Place and West Street, you have buildings that were originally residential. Over time, they were converted to office. And now we're seeing them being proposed to convert back to residential to their original use. So very exciting.
Historic buildings that have seen a lot of activity in their time and maybe now returning back to their roots. Yeah. Do you see much by way of, this is an audience question, when we talk preservation, do you see much in terms of the historic preservation tax credit possibility? I mean, is that something that the city could be interested in?
Well, that's a great question. So, as I mentioned before, that the margins are very thin on this type of conversion, and developers are looking.
Thin margins meaning it's tough to make money when you do this type of project.
Exactly.
Fair to say?
Yeah. And so participants in the program are really looking for all different avenues that they can cobble together to make these projects profitable. And so they start with the tax abatement from the city. They may layer on whether it's tax credits around energy efficiency, But certainly historic tax credits at both the state and the federal level are something that a number of our applicants are exploring and going down that path.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And in the realm of energy efficiency, I want to come back about just the sustainability element of what this looks like. We all know real estate is surprisingly one of the biggest contributors to embodied carbon. Maybe not surprising to y'all, but maybe surprising to our audience. But what do you see as some of the biggest sustainability benefits of a conversion like this? Maren, I'm curious.
Sure. I mean, I think number one, it's to me, the greenest building is the existing building, right? The way we can do the best from a sustainability point of view is to reuse, in my opinion. But that doesn't always work out. But I think also when you're using that existing infrastructure, it helps with the embodied carbon. You're not having all of the emissions that come out of construction and waste and all those things that would be as part of a ground-up project. So in and of itself, its nature, it's sustainable.
Mark, you mentioned BERDO. So what building energy reduction
Disclosure ordinance.
Disclosure ordinance, thank
Yes.
you. I knew.
I'm sure somebody here can correct
But
me.
when we're looking at not just a green building is the greenest building an existing building versus building new and introducing so much, when we're looking at not just existing carbon but trying to reduce a carbon footprint, how can office to residential conversion play a role in that?
Sure. If I can just sort of pick up on the sort of the embodied carbon first. So we were doing a study. They were thinking of rezoning in New York. So we did our folks down there did a study to look at if they expanded the zoning, so an extra 200 buildings, and looked at the sort of the whole life carbon, so the embodied and the operation, which kind of then gets to your question about electrifying. It was something like the city could save 54% of carbon that potentially would have been emitted by 2050. That's 2.3 million cars. So, to Maren's point, it's a significant, sustainability benefit. So then, how does that play into the, to the regulation? So, building on BERDO, if we start to think about and BUDO, if we start to think about embodied carbon, and is there a performance metric around that? So for sure, electrifying systems, most residential buildings, we ought to be able to, electrify. Domestic hot water is a little tricky, but, it's easier than an office.
So compared to the way most buildings are powered right now, or most offices, which is...
Existing, which is sort of gas-fired. But, we're moving towards heat pumps. Offices, residential is sort of easier to do via heat pumps. So if you sort of consider the whole life carbon, the embodied carbon, what you're saving there, you're electrifying the building. There's a significant benefit, to the city, I would say, by considering this type of project.
Absolutely, and as I mentioned before, the fact that we're asking our applicants to meet the stretch code for green energy, that ends out coming hand in hand with almost everybody's switching to heat pumps, and that actually ends out getting them down the path, accelerating them down the path towards BERDO compliance, as well as what we're very pleased to see with one of our more recent applicants, when they did their initial LEED scorecard, without just simply their conversion program as they had brought it in. They went through the scorecard for initial look and were 1 point away from achieving LEED Gold with having done nothing additional. And if you start with that, and then you can then say, well, if you want to become more intentional and embrace sustainability even more, you can certainly achieve LEED Gold and then beyond. So I think that there's a huge sustainability component to these conversions.
And then we had a project in DC. Admittedly, this was an office expansion, but I think it comes to the sort of the same idea as they wanted to add floor space. In that case, we did it with a mass timber solution. So that further, reduces the weight slightly, compared to a steel or concrete building. But
so what is mass timber?
Mass timber is sort of manufactured timber, but effectively it's lower embodied carbon if you're building by steel or if you're building with concrete. So difficult to do with labs, but office, multifamily, using that timber construction. And it could be everything from, stick built versus through to the engineered lumber.
We're not talking like Massachusetts wood. It's just...
Oh, sorry. We're not branded mass timber. No, sorry.
I mean, you never know.
I missed that.
Massachusetts, we have a pretty solid ego.
This is
up
our
here,
city.
so-
This is our city. This is mass timber. We're building with mass timber.
But making it so not, I mean, that timber being less heavy than steel or concrete, and some of the benefits.
And lower embodied carbon, so it's double benefit.
And it fits perfectly with the program because it's an adaptive reuse program, and so we allow physical extension, but we do it based on what the existing structure can bear in terms of weight. And we actually already have a proposal coming into us where they're looking at adding additional floors using mass timber.
So physical extension, meaning they're putting
more
on
floors on top. So
Okay.
if you have a 6-story building, you may be able to do as many as 4 floors on top, depending on the sort of robustness of the foundations. And so it's something that we're encouraging if folks want to go down that path, but clearly it is easier just to do a conversion within the existing building envelope.
Okay. All right, we've got time for about one more question. So I just want to say thank you all preemptively. But John, I want to bring back to something that you said at the beginning of our conversation, where you mentioned 20% income restricted as a requirement of participating in the city's office conversion program. Income restricted meaning affordable housing.
Absolutely.
Does anybody else have an affordable requirement in other cities that you've worked in?
Oh, definitely. Some as much as 30%.
Okay.
Yep.
So, John, but why is the 20% a priority for the city of Boston?
Well, it was a priority. So the program was launched in October of last year, and we immediately said that we wanted to meet the new inclusionary zoning standards, which actually are coming in effect next week on October 1st.
Oh, boy.
And that is 20%, but we're asking for it to be on site because we really want the affordable units to be in these buildings downtown where folks really can be able to live and, vibrant community. And so it's 17% at 60% of the area median income. So nice and good level, as well as 3% for Section 8 voucher holders. And so that's something that's bringing market rate voucher to downtown, which hasn't been seen to date.
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much for your time this afternoon. It's a really lovely conversation. I'm Catherine Carlock with the Boston Globe, and handing it over to Dan.
Thank you, Catherine. That was an amazing discussion. I felt like that could go on for another hour. And thank you to the Boston Globe for sponsoring this incredible summit. Special thank you to our panelists. I would like to grab each of you after and learn more, but you're going to be in high demand. So thank you very much for this time. I just wanted to reiterate JP Morgan's support for this type of effort, this type of initiative, because it strengthens our economy, it strengthens our city, and it strengthens our communities. Thank you.